Okay, so we've blocked out our site and we're ready to start doing our code. For those of you who were with me last week where we actually blocked out our site, I'm going to do this one again just to make sure that everyone gets it. So there might have been some students that maybe weren't around. So I want to explain brackets and how brackets works. I want to explain some of the plugins that we added in and how we can use them to help us to be able to code a little bit faster, make things a little bit easier for us. This can also help later on with the other video tutorials that are around. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to start up brackets. So if you haven't installed brackets, you can get brackets from your browser. So in your browser, if you were to type in just in Google search wherever you are, whether you're using Chrome or whatever, just Google Adobe brackets. It's Adobe brackets, and it's that one. So the address is really just brackets.io. Now the coder that Liam uses in his video tutorials is called Atom. So if you find that that's going to help you to be able to use Atom, he also talks about certain plugins that you can use for Atom. The reason why I don't use Atom is I find it a little bit difficult to work with or to teach more like it. I like using it, but to teach with because it's a little more advanced than brackets. It does have you can get some really nice plugins for it. So for instance, the color picker is probably a lot better in Atom than it is in brackets, plugins wise or add-ons wise. But it's in terms of helping you code, I find brackets is a little bit easier to work with. So that's why I'm sticking to brackets instead of Atom. But you can download either or and just follow the tutorials to customize and add add-ons to it as well. Okay, so I'm downloading brackets. If I click on that, I've already done it though, and once you've done it on a PC, pretty easy, just double click the exe file and it installs. On a Mac, if you do have a Mac, just please make sure that you're not double clicking, so it's very different. So you double click the first thing, which is called a DMG. DMG is basically a virtual drive, a drive. The DMG doesn't install by itself. It gives you two icons, one which is the application itself and the other one is the disk, your applications drive, sorry. So what you need to do is you need to drag and drop from left to right. So drag the icon, the brackets icon, into the applications folder, and that will install the applications. Please don't double click that brackets icon, because then all you're doing is you're starting brackets from the virtual drive. Then when you shut down brackets, every change that you've made will reset. Okay, so make sure that you install it properly. Right. Same thing with Atom. It'll give you either an installer or a DMG. Just make sure that if you've got a Mac, you drag and drop across. So open up the DMG, then you've got two icons, drag the brackets icon from the left into the applications icon on the right, and it will install. Then close that, and then you can go into your applications and find the application from there. Okay, that's for Mac users only. If you have any issues with that, make sure you give me a message. I'm recording myself on a PC. Unfortunately, my MacBook broke down, which is what used to have my recorder in it, so I can't actually demonstrate on a Mac what the installation is like, but I can still help you if you need that help. Right, once you've installed it, you should have it. So I've got it here in Windows. If I type something like brackets, you'll see it pop up over here. Okay, so if I click on that, that'll open up my brackets. Now yours is probably going to look a little bit different to mine. Unfortunately, I can't reset this back to factory settings. It just is the way it is from where I last used it. Okay, so but you'll probably have some code here and some welcome stuff, but that's okay because we're going to get rid of that. But before we go on with that, one of the things I need to mention is that I did add some plugins in here to make it a little more functional for us. Okay, so to add our add-ons, we need to go to File and Extension Manager. Just let the little spinny thing go and it'll load up some of the available extensions. So the ones I want you to install, so if I go to Installed here, so no, you don't need that one, you don't need that one. So, okay, so we want Colors++, we want Emmet, Emmet's the most important one here, and we want Monokai. So let's do this one at a time. So I want Emmet. Emmet's the most important add-on, and I'll explain how that works soon. But what I'd like you to do is just make sure you look for Emmet, not reverse Emmet. We don't want reverse Emmet, just Emmet. So by Sergey Chikionok. Okay, install that. So you can see it's already installed for me. Once you've done that, then I'd like you to look for, so if I just type in color, and we're looking for Colors++, that one there. So if you install that one by Abdul Al-Husseini, install that for me. And the other one is actually not an add-on, but a theme. Okay, so if I can get you to go to Themes, and so in Themes we're looking for Monokai, and there's heaps of Monokai versions, so Monokai Plus, Monokai Corel, and so all we're looking for is just the standard Monokai. Just makes it easier to use. And this one here, so Stefan Bruckmann, that one, Monokai, just Monokai. So you can see that's installed. Okay, so once you've installed those, then we're kind of ready to go. So I'll close that. So your theme probably looks a little bit different to mine, and that's because the default is usually a white background with some colored text, which is really hard on the eyes, okay? So what we're going to do first is we're going to change the theme. So we're going to go to View, Themes. We're going to change the theme from the brackets light, which is, this is what you guys probably see. I'm going to change the theme from that to Monokai, and that'll bring our theme to this. Now, I've got my font size set to quite large, 18 pixels. You don't need to change yours to that, but whatever makes it comfortable for you. You can always go back and readjust this later on if you need to. I'm going to just leave mine at that. I think yours is either 12 or 14. Done. Now that we've done that, and you guys probably don't have this either, you probably have something like this. Now that we've done that, what we need to do is we need to start our site. So to start the site, we're going to need to navigate to where we're going to save our site. Now, you can put that on the desktop if you like, but what I've done is you can see that I've got a directory here, so I'm in Billy Blue, blah, 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 and I created a folder called Site Lesson Semester 1 2020. You don't need to call it that. You can call it based on the assessment. So later on you can probably use this to customize this to do your assessment, so Electric Eel if you want, but in my case I'm calling it this because I teach so many of these, so I need to label it specifically Site Lesson Semester 1 2020. Inside that folder, so we create a new folder, so you should know how to do that by now. So new folder, yeah, so you can do that the same way both Mac and PC by right clicking and going to new folder. That's what I did. I created a new folder in there, and inside of that we need to create some extra folders. So this will be our site root directory. So this is where brackets will look for stuff. Sorry, brackets here will look for stuff for us to load on. Okay, so in here I'm going to create a new file. So any images we're going to bring into the site need to be inside of this folder. So I'm going to create a folder called images. From the previous lessons, you would have learnt that HTML and CSS work together. So we also need a CSS folder for our styles. Remember, HTML is to structure, CSS is to control the look of our site. The images and CSS. We can also add a couple of extras which we might not use just yet. So we'll do a fonts folder, and we'll also add in a JavaScript folder, which we're not going to look at yet, but it's good to have it here for now. So later on it's ready to use. So these are folders where we're going to put specific things. Embedded fonts go in here, images go in here, any JavaScript we create will go in here. CSS that links to our HTML will go in here. Okay, so we've done our file structure. If I go back to brackets, you'll probably notice that for me, you can see it there. And the reason why you can see it there is because what we need to do now is tell brackets where we want to locate our site. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring up a folder like this. Sorry, for some reason I shook it and that disappeared. So I'm going to put this folder here over the top of brackets, as you can see here. That will allow me to drag and drop this site folder to the left-hand bar of my bracket. So just somewhere on the left-hand bar. Okay, so just make sure you drag it like that, and that will, what that will do is it will dictate our site lesson, or whatever you call it here, as the location as to where we're going to save our files. You can see that I've got my CSS, my fonts, my images, and my JavaScript here. Okay, so the next step is going to be to actually create a HTML document. Our first document to load on a site must be located in the root directory. So what you're seeing here, this area here, is what we call the root directory. If I look in here, so what's inside here, this is our root directory, our main directory. So the first file to load must be in this location. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, New, or you can see Control-N or Command-N for Mac. This is an untitled blank document. If we try and code with this, brackets is not going to know what we're trying to do. It needs to know what file type we're going to be working on, because you could be working on a CSS document, you could be working on a JavaScript document, you could be working on a HTML document, you could be working on a PHP document. It needs to know what kind of document you're going to be working on before it can help you. So once we've created a blank document, we then need to save the file. So save, or Command S or Control S, you'll notice that it's trying to save it in the root directory. So this is where it should be saving it. Please do not create a subdirectory like pages or something like that, or HTML in here. This is going to cause problems for us later on. The first page to load should always be in the root directory, and it needs to always be called, so this is a must, it must be called index with the extension .html. It must be called index.html. This is your loading page. When the browser is brought over to, so when you type in here, say for instance fontawesome.com, when you type in that address, how does a browser know what file to open? It looks for a specific file. Now there are variations on this, but the most common is index.html. So it's looking for a file called index.html when it goes through this address. So you must call this index.html. No variations, please. So no one index or home or index 01. It must just be called index. I'm going to save that. Now that we've saved that file, so for some reason it's closed on me. I've got a bit of a bug on this version of brackets, but yeah, so it should have just kept it open, but you can see here that I've got index.html highlighted. Now that I've done that, now I can start coding my HTML. Again, going back to the previous slides, we would have discussed the bare minimum HTML that is required to create a valid HTML page. So we were talking about, I'll just open up box models, that's the one. Right, so here we've got our site. The first level, the ultimate first level that needs to be displayed in order to make, or coded in order to make a valid HTML page is HTML. Inside of the HTML, we then need two elements, the head and the body tag. Once we've created these basic tags, then everything else goes inside of these elements. Okay, so we need the bare minimum code in order for this HTML to be valid. Now, I've got you to install a plugin called Emmet. All Emmet does is it makes it easier for us to be able to code rather than us having to code from scratch. So I'll just put this on. You can see that this, as you type in a short name or abbreviation of what you need. Now, we're not going to do anything that difficult, but by typing something quickly in, it'll generate the code that we need without us having to think about it, as you can see there. Okay, so I'll close that. Don't want to intimidate you too much. So Emmet comes with an inbuilt skeleton code shortcut for you. Okay, so if I was to put in my exclamation mark, just the exclamation mark, so shift number 1, and then if I hit the tab key on my keyboard, it generates the skeleton, so there's the minimum amount of HTML that's required. You can see that we've got our doc type at the top. I explained this before as well, what the doc type was. So this tells the browser what type of HTML we're using. In this case, we're using HTML5. This is what HTML5 uses as its doc type. In here, then we've got our ultimate parent, which is our HTML, which inside, so I'm going to just select these. So probably best that you copy me with this one. So I'm going to highlight from head to the close body tag and hit the tab key. So inside of our HTML, we have then the head tag and the body tag. So these are the two children inside of HTML. Inside of the head tag, we then have the meta tag and the title tag. So these guys are inside of the head tag. So this is what we call encapsulation. Objects are inside of objects. So boxes are inside of boxes. Okay. Now there's one more thing that I like to put in here in order to make this scalable for later on. So we want to do some responsive design. This is going to help us. This really only applies to Apple devices like the iPad and the iPhone, but it's going to be quite helpful for us. So it's another meta tag. So in this case, we're using a meta tag that gives the browser information about the character set that we want to use. There's all sorts of different meta tags. Some contain keywords for search engines and so on and so forth. But in this case, I want to put in a meta tag that gives the browser information about scalability. So I'm going to put meta : VB for viewport. So VP, sorry, for viewport. I'm going to hit the tab key and you'll notice that it creates this meta tag with the name of viewport. Then it gives us this scalability option, which is generally for Apple devices. But if you don't put this meta tag in, you're going to have problems with scalability on devices later on, mainly on Apple devices. Okay, so once we've done that, so we've got a title of document. Let's change that to title of electric eel for now. Okay, save that. So what happens if we have just this plain code in our browser? So in order to test this, we could, so now this is going to depend, guys. So hopefully you all have Chrome installed in your machine. Brackets comes with its own live preview, which means as you edit, it updates things through this button here, live preview, and that'll open it up. So I think it's been updated, but as far as I know, it only works on Chrome, but I think it has been set to open up nowadays on other browsers as well. If for some reason this doesn't work or cause problems, the other thing you could do is you could right click the index from here on the right, tell it to show in Explorer, So it's going to show it to me in a window here. If you double click it, because it's got the HTML extension, the operating system, whether Windows or Mac, knows that it needs to be, the HTML needs to be open in a browser. So it'll open it up in whatever your default browser is, whether that's Safari or Edge or Chrome, or in my case Firefox. Now I do suggest that you're actually using at least Safari. If you have Safari, you might need to make a couple of changes if you want to be able to explore that code in the browser. Otherwise, if you guys want to leave me messages on how you can do that with a Mac, again, I don't have a Mac at the moment, so it's a bit hard for me to show you, but I can explain it to you if you need me to. So if I double click that, it should just open it on the browser like that. Okay. Otherwise, if you were to back here, if I was to click on this little flash sign, it's going to open it up in Chrome, and this will be a live update, and you won't see much yet because the only thing we've put in our code is the title that's renderable or seeable by the user. You can see that the title is actually this thing that you see here on the tab, electric eel. Okay, and I can change that. So my first site. Save that. You can see that it updates here, my first site. Okay, so we've created our skeleton type, the bare minimum that is required to be able to run our HTML website. Now that we've done that, we can start to look at, hopefully you guys at this point have created the block level elements that you needed to, so I'm just going to do it on the preview mode, that you needed to be able to plan your blocking. So first level of blocks, header, div with a class of content, and footer are the ones that we're going to need to structure. Where do they go in this code? So going from the lectures that we spoke about last time, the head tag is for invisible information. So the only exception to that, of course, is the title, which gets rendered in a tab. Everything else is invisible. So and none of this stuff is read by the user or seen by the user. This is only seen by the browser. So anything that's invisible needs to go in the head tag. Anything that's renderable will go in the body tag, so inside of this tag here. Now please don't confuse header with head. The head tag is a parent tag which is directly underneath our HTML. It contains invisible information. The header tag is a block level element which is renderable. So it's something that contains things at the top, usually at the top, of course. It's a group element, so it's going to group things together, and it's completely renderable, so you can actually see it. Whatever goes inside of this will be seen by the browser. Okay, so what we want to do here is we want to start to structure these elements that you see here. Okay, so I want the header, and I want the div with a class of content, and I want the footer. Now this is where Emmet really helps, because I think with some of the tutorials you'll see with Liam, which is, there's nothing wrong with it. What you need to do is you need to type in the open tag, which would be less than sign, and then the name of the tag, so header, and you can see that it's trying to help me here. And then I have to close it with a greater than sign, and then it will create an open and close tag for me for that, as you can see there, right? So that's the header that you see there. But with Emmet, so I'm going to delete that, I can just type in header, then hit the tab key, and it'll do the same thing. Right? So rather than me having to do all that work, I can get, so obviously the only problem with that is that you don't get the pop-up menu. So if I do this, I get this pop-up menu which allows me to kind of choose from that. So if you don't remember what things should be called, then that's when this helps. But if you know what something should be called, then, and notice the other thing is that I've got capitals here, but I don't have capitals here. When we code, we don't use capitals. I'm just using capitals, so it's easier for people to see what these elements are. Okay, so if I hit the tab key, I've got my header. Right, so div with a class of content. If I go underneath the header, if I type in div dot content and I hit the tab key, you'll notice that it codes it a little bit different. So in this case, what it's doing is it's creating an open tag of div and a closed tag of div. And inside the open tag, we have this thing called an attribute. You'll notice that a lot of these tags tend to have attributes, like the HTML, which has a language attribute, the meta tag, which has a character set attribute. This meta tag has a name attribute and a content attribute. This div tag has an attribute of class with a value of content. Now we can name this div anything we like. It can be, I can call it main if I want. But I call it content because for me that's logical. Just I'm holding content inside of here, so that's why I'm calling it content. But there's no hard and fast rule on this. You can call it whatever you want as long as you then reference this when you use your CSS. So it comes in handy when we do our CSS. Last one is the footer. So again, another main element within the body. So I'm going to type in the footer, hit the tab key. So we've got open and close tag of footer. So we've got open and close tag of header, open and close tag of div, and an open and close tag of footer. These are our next level elements: header, div of content, a class of content, and footer. Okay, so we've done the first level. Now, normally what I would do is, as I code, I might put in one more level at least. So I'd probably put this next level, if it lets me show it, this next level in. But what I want to do with you guys is I want it to kind of look, so what we see here, I want it to kind of look like this, right? So visually, so if I was to save this now and I was to check this in my browser, I'm not going to see anything. The reason for that is because by default, these elements are just containers. They're just groups. They're not, we don't see them. They're invisible elements. So they're there, but we don't see them. So if I was to go into here and I was to explore, so I'm going to right click and inspect this element or inspect this area, you'll notice here that there's my body. So you can see my HTML structure here. So I've got the HTML, got the head, got the body. I open that up. I've got the header tag, I've got a div with a class of content, and I've got a footer. So they're there, but they're just not seen. They're hidden objects. So in order for us to be able to see them so we can visualize exactly what's going on, this is where we're going to need some CSS. It's a CSS that controls the look of our site. Now, again, in the last class I mentioned the difference between the three different main ways that we can place CSS in our web page. The first one is not recommended. Okay, so the first one, please do not do this. If you do this, you're not going to do well with your marks because you should not be using it. So this is the ultimate level of CSS. If you want to override something, this is probably the strongest way of doing it, but I would not recommend that you do this unless it's been done through JavaScript. Okay, so the first way is what we call inline CSS. Inline CSS would require that you put in an attribute of style. And in that attribute, then you can style it whatever you want. So I can give this a width of, say, 600 pixels. I finish off my style using a semicolon, and then I can say I want the height to be 200 pixel. That still is invisible because by default these are invisible items, so we need to color it in somehow. So I'm going to give this a background color of, say, red. Right, now I can use the word red. I can also put in an RGB value, or I can put a hexadecimal value. In my case, I'm just going to use the word red. Just makes it easier for me to kind of experiment. So if I was to do that, you'll notice that I've now got a visible block that is 600 pixels wide, 200 pixels high, and it has a background of red. Okay, so this is what we call inline. The problem with inline is every time you want to style something, you need to go into that element, you need to go into the attribute, and you need to change these things. So the whole point of styling nowadays is we're creating repetitive designs, a design that we can put, so we can make the header look the same way throughout each page. So if we've got 100 pages, they all look the same. Say you did it this way for 100 pages, and now your client wants you to change the background color to blue. You would have to go to 100 pages, look for the header element, and change the attribute for all of those. Okay, so that is a really slow way of styling things, and this is why it's not recommended. Okay, the next one, again, is another overriding way of styling. This is called embedded. Okay, so this gets embedded into every page. So again, though, this would be slow, because if I was to style this the same way, say the header, width and height with a background for 100 pages, and now my client wants to change that background to blue, I'd have to go to 100 pages and change the background color for each of those pages. So again, that's a really slow way of styling things. To embed CSS, we use a tag, and that tag goes into our invisible area, which is our head tag. So I would use the style tag. So this is a tag, not an attribute. We could also use the attribute for style of type and text CSS. You don't need to nowadays with HTML5, but that's the kind of the standard way of doing it. And then from here, we need to target a particular element. So before we did it inline, so we knew that it needed to be within this object, so we didn't need to target an object. But from here, how does the browser know what to target? So what we need to do is create a selector first. So a selector is the object that you want to control. In this case, I'm targeting the header, so it's as simple as just saying header. So I want to target the header. We then place our rules inside of curly brackets. So different from what we did here. Okay, so where we had a style, and then inside we had our attributes. So width, 600, so on and so forth. In here, we put these attributes. So these things here, these are what we call rules. These rules go inside of here, inside of the curly bracket. Now, I can space that, and it's much easier to see the code if you space it line by line. Okay, so I'm going to delete this. Now, bracket's going to try and help me with this because it knows that I'm trying to type in CSS. So if I start typing in, say, width, you can see that it pops up with this menu. I'm going to choose width. Here I can put in 600. And when we're measuring, we're using either pixels or percentages or ems. We'll talk about those once we get past this part here. So 600 width, we can put in a height of 200 pixels, and I can put in a background color of, say, pink. Okay, so now if I save that, you'll notice that I've got that. But again, this needs to be placed on every page. So if you've got 100 pages, each needs to have this in it. The problem with that, you want to update all pages, you have to go to every page to update that. So that doesn't really help. So this is only good if you want to override. So if you've got every page with a particular background color, for instance, and you want only one of those pages to have a different background color, then you would place this as an embedded style inside of that page in order to override or to change the style. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of that as well. The last way of adding CSS is, well, there's actually two, but this is the last of the main three ways. So there's actually 4 ways to install CSS in the end. is to link it. So to link it though, you need to create a new document. So I'm going to go to File, New, and I'd like you to follow me with this as well if you're following. So I'm going to go to File, New, and I'm going to save this file, Save. And this time though, because this is a CSS document, we have a special folder for it. So I'm going to put the CSS document inside of the CSS folder. And I'm going to call this, again, naming convention wise, it can be called anything really. You call it main, say for your main CSS. In some instances, I'll have one for a structure, so I'll call it structure.css, and another one for fonts or typography.css. So I can divide my CSS styles into different files as well if I wanted to. If you were doing a WordPress theme, you would call it style.css because that's what WordPress requires for the main part of the theme. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll call this one style for the moment .css. Please make sure you do put in that extension .css. Later on, we'll probably change it because we're going to be doing responsive, but for the moment, we'll keep it as style.css. Save that. So now we have, again, I don't know why mine does that, but I'll just open it up. Now we have a CSS document. Don't know why it keeps these untitled documents opened up in there. But anyway, so there's our CSS document. So a couple of things that I would want to do here though. I want to be able to reference what's here using this document here. So rather than having to switch back and forth between those, we can actually have them both opened at the same time, which will make our life a little bit easier. In order to do that, I click on this little button here and I go to split vertical. Now I've got a left and a right. So I actually want the left to have my index.html opened. If I click on the right now, I can have the style.css open. So you just click on the tabs like that, okay, and then you can choose what you want to open. Now mine's not displaying, mine's a bit buggy for some reason, but that's basically what I've got now. So I've got my HTML, index.html file on the left, my style.css on the right. I can probably shrink this a little bit here. Right, so now I want to control the header, the div with a class of content, and the footer to make them look kind of like this, like these boxes. So I'll hide this stuff here. So I just want them to look like these boxes, colored boxes that you see here. Okay, so we need to first, remember with the embedded, we needed to make a selector, so we need to select the object, then we need to tell it what to do. First thing is to do our selector header. Then we put in some curly brackets. All of our rules, all the things that we want to change go inside of the curly brackets. I'm going to hit return because I want to space that out. And we'll start with the width and then the height. So let's experiment with fixed measurements. So I'm going to do a width of 500 pixels. I'm going to do a height. Oh, sorry guys, I should mention. So I did a width of 500 pixels. Always make sure that you use your units, px. When you finished a rule, so when you finished the line of the rule, you need to always make sure you put the semicolon. If you don't put the semicolon, it's going to cause you a lot of problems because the browser doesn't know that you have finished with this rule. Okay, so you probably notice that if I try doing something here, it doesn't try to help me because it's saying, what, you're still continuing from here, are you? Okay, so if I do this though, you'll notice that it's trying to help me now because it knows what I'm trying to do. So height, 100 pixels. And we'll do a background color. Notice how I'm not typing it in, so BAC. Notice how I've got all these options here. I can choose from the background color here, and then the coder will actually try and finish it for me. So rather than me trying to type everything in, it's always best to let the coder finish it for you. And then from here, I can actually choose a color. So I'm going to go orange, or chocolate, sorry. So I'm doing chocolate there. Save that. Once I've saved that, if I go to my browser, now for some reason it's not header. Okay, this is where sometimes you get some problems where, oh, okay, no. It's one thing I haven't done. So I've got a style.css, and I did this last time as well, and I've got an index.css, but I haven't actually linked the two together. So they're not actually talking to each other at the moment. So I need to link the two together. I'm going to go to index.html. So in the index.html, just underneath the title, I'm going to create a link. So again, if I just type in the word link rather than trying to type it all myself and then press the tab key, I get the attributes that are required. I might just shrink this a little bit so you guys can see. Link. So we've got a link with a rel of style sheet. So this is done for you automatically. href stands for hyperreference. So it's looking for a reference to link to in this case. So we want to link to the style. Now again, brackets helps you with some of this stuff, whilst unless you have an add-on with Atom, I don't think it helps you with this. Okay, so first of all, we remember that our style is actually not in the root directory, it's inside of a folder called CSS. If I start typing CS, you can see here it gives me CSS /, that's what we're after, so I'm going to click on that. And then inside of that, it looks for any files that are in that location, and you can see there's only one, style.css, I'm going to choose that. And you can see that it's actually typed that in for me. So now, if I save that, it's linked. And if I go back to my browser, refresh again, sometimes you need to refresh. It should be a live link, but sometimes it isn't live, so I need to refresh that page. You can see that I've got that kind of orangey rectangle at 500 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall. Okay, so again, the videos that Liam does, the video tutorials, explain the difference between fixed dimensions or pixel dimensions, percentages, and ems, which is generally a a size used for fonts, okay, which we'll talk about in a minute. So let's take a look at percentages and how they work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the width of this header, rather than 500 pixels exactly, I'm going to tell it to be half the size or half the width of its parent. Now its parent is the body. So the body has all of these elements actually have default settings, usually dictated by the browser. So the browser has default settings as to how each of these things should look. You'll notice that a lot more with formatting elements, like for instance your H1s and paragraphs. Okay, so if I say I want the header to be 50%, then what I'm saying is I want it to be 50% of the width of the body. Now the body by default, the body's width by default will be 100%. Okay, so if I was to do that and save that, you'll notice that my rectangle is about half the width of my browser. About half the width. It's kind of weird because of this gap. We'll talk about this gap later on. It's about half the width. And if I was to shrink this browser, you'll notice that it's always going to be half the width. Right, so this is really useful for us in terms of being able to be flexible with our design for different size screens. Now remember that large screens are not all the same. So my TV size is different to my laptop screen, which is different to a different laptop screen, which is different to a different desktop screen. Yeah. So they're all large screens, but they're different sizes. So we need to be able to be flexible for that. If we have a fixed size, we're not being very flexible for that size. Okay, so that's what a percentage allows us to do. So if I was to change this to say 100%, you'll notice that it takes up about 100%. You can see the gap there, but about 100% of the screen. And again, it's going to shrink based on that dimension. So it's going to shrink the size. So that's what a percentage is. Percentages are based on the parent's dimensions. This is where the problem lies though. By default, all of these elements are actually made to be collapsible, so they should be able to collapse. So that means that if I was to change the height to 100%, the container collapses. If I was to put something in the header, for instance, like some text, you'll notice that the container expands to suit that content. And that's the whole point of our HTML, so that it automatically expands to suit the content. So the more content I have in here, well, it's going to take a while for me to, I might actually copy that. Oops, what just happened? Right, you can see that it'll expand based on the content that's in there. I'm going to undo that because I don't want this. This is badly structured content. It should not be like that at all. Right. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so it's collapsible, and if I don't have anything in there, then it won't expand. The height of this element is based on the height of the body, and the height of the body is not set, so it's a collapsible item. So what we need to do, if we wanted this to work, there's a couple of ways around this. Okay, we can either say, so if I wanted 100%, we can say 100 based on the vertical, based on the viewport height, or viewport width if we were doing the width. In our case, we're doing the height, so VH. And if I did that, then it measures it based on the height of the viewport. But the problem with that is you probably notice there's not really 100% because it adds to the dimension, because it's actually taking beyond that screen height or the screen width, right? So you did the same with the width, for instance. So if I change that to VH, sorry, VW, you'll notice that there's a scroll on the left and the right as well. Okay, so it's not super accurate and it can cause problems as well. So I wouldn't really recommend you use this method either. Okay, so I'm going to keep that at 100%. Right, so that's one way around it though, but like I said, I wouldn't really use this method for 100% high. There is another method which is tried and true. That's an older method. You need to make sure that all of the parents that hold this header are using percentage values for their measurements. So what we'll do, just above the header, we're going to make a couple of selections. Now in CSS, you can actually select multiple things at once, rather than just selecting one and adding a rule and selecting another. So I want to select the HTML and the body because both of these need to be set to a percentage height. So I'm going to say HTML first and then comma body. Right, so I'm selecting both the HTML and the body, and I'm going to put in my rules in here. And I'm going to say I want the width by default to be 100%. I want the height. I don't know why it does that whenever I hit return, but anyway, 100%. By doing that, because the header is a child of both the HTML and the body, it should now fill. So I might just refresh. Don't know why it's not doing it right though. switch it off and switch it back on again. No. Okay, so I've got some issues with my live update, and that tends to happen, guys. So like I said, if you ever get issues like that, what you can do is just show in Explorer, or I think it's show in Finder for Mac, and it's not really doing what I want for some reason. It's still giving me that viewport. Sorry. Let's just see what's going on with this. Okay, something's going on with my... Okay, I might just... Okay, yeah, I might just close it. Something's going on with my application. It's really strange. That just closed on me then. Okay. Just open it again. I might have to go through some things though. This usually doesn't happen. It could just be that it's because I'm recording as I'm going through, and that's causing some issues for me. Okay, so still scrolling though, which really shouldn't do. Anyway, it shouldn't be doing that, but one of the things that we could do to fix that as well, so we've got this thing called padding and margin, which is the default. So these gaps that you see here are usually through padding, so that's spacing in between our elements. Okay, so if I was to reset this to, so if I say margin equals 0 and padding equals 0, that will get rid of my problem, and that won't be scrollable anymore, as you can see. Refresh that. Yep. Okay, and it shouldn't be scrollable here. I don't know. Oh, there you go. I don't know why it was doing scrollable stuff before. Okay, so now there's no gap, and let me just explain this. I think I explained it before as well. If I was to use I'm just going to use a default setting here. Okay. So if I was to create an element like this one here, I'm just going to give it a fill. So there's our element here. And I'm going to create a, sorry, my applications are running really slow. I think it's because of the recording. I'll create some text. Actually, oh, come on. Running really slow. Oh God. Okay. No, still running slow. Probably got too many things running at the same time. Yep. Oh. Oh my God. It's just running. I think Dropbox is probably starting to slow things down on me again. So I might just pause syncing. That usually solves the problem of slowing down. There's a bit of a spike happening there. Nope. Still having problems with it in design. This is not good. For some reason it doesn't want to pop up. Okay, I'm going to just kill InDesign and I might try and open it again. I'll just pause this while I'm waiting. Okay, got this working now. So here's my example. This is the container that we're trying to move around. So for instance, this is the top left-hand corner of the screen. One way to move it around, and this is not the only way, but one way to move our container around is to use margins. So basically what margins are is spacing on the outside of this container. So a margin would move objects, left and right or top to bottom, or if you've got something that's floating to the right from the right to the left or from the bottom up. And so we can use a margin to push objects around by declaring spacing outside of that container. We can also space containers based on the margin. So if I had a couple of containers or a couple of objects that needed to be spaced a certain amount, I could use the same margin to space between them. Okay, so we use margin. So same thing with paragraphs. We want to space paragraphs. We tend to use margin to space those paragraphs. Okay, so basically margin is to space objects, and it's to create space outside of the object itself. Padding is to create space inside of an object. So in this case, this text is actually hitting the edge of my rectangle. It makes it a little bit unreadable. So what we want is we want spacing on the inside of this rectangle. In InDesign, this is known as inset spacing, right? So I'm just going to use my shortcut key and inset spacing here. And if I say 20 pixel gap, you'll notice that I get spacing on the inside of that container, pushing the text inside. So this is what we call padding. Padding is spacing that goes inside the container. So again, I could use a little line from here to there. Just change the stroke thickness. Oops. This is called padding. So padding is spacing on the inside of our container. So basically what we're doing here is we're just saying that any margins for between the HTML and the body, or any padding inside of the HTML and the body, reset them all to 0 so that we don't have that ugly gap happening there. That's all we're saying here. Okay. Right. So, and we'll take a look at how margin works later on as well with our paragraphs. So what we've done so far is experimented with our width and a height percentage based. Now, you can use a combination of things. So for instance, in my design, my header is a specific height. We want it to be 100% wide so that it flexes across, but we don't need it to do that height-wise, right? Because height-wise you can scroll up and down. So we can do a fixed height. So this block, based on measuring the final design that you see here, is actually 600 pixels high. So here's where I can use a fixed height, 600 pixels high. Okay. So that now actually, am I viewing it? It's really strange. So I'm really getting some really strange things happening here. So this is not actually working again. Oh God. I'm just going to test it on this instead. There you go. So this is, at least it should be if I test it here. If I go to my inspect element, it's 100% wide and 600 height. Okay, so and scrollable because my screen's not so high resolution, so I need to scroll up and down to be able to see it. Right, so now we can start controlling the next thing, which is our content. The difference here is that we can have multiple div elements, right? So in order to be able to identify them as independent objects, we tend to either give them an ID, a unique identifier, or a class. So in this case, we used a class. So how do we select a class? So there's, depending on which attribute we're using, whether it's an ID or a class, we tend to use a special symbol. So for an ID, we use hash. For a class, we use a dot. Now mine's popping up with this content thing. I think I've got an add-on that helps me to be able to pick that. In your case, you probably don't have that. Sorry. Just wait until this loads up, and not SAS, not no, no, no. No, it doesn't seem to have it, but maybe this version of brackets is actually linking directly to this. So anyway, if I do a dot, I get content, so I can choose content. You can see it finishes it off for me. If it doesn't do that, just type in the word content and do the little curly bracket. And so we're targeting the class. So to target a class, we use a dot. Okay, targeting the class of content. So we're not targeting the div itself, we're targeting a class this time. So there's a difference between an element. When you target an element, you just give it you just type in the name of that element. If we're targeting a class, we're targeting the class by using a dot and then the class name, which is content. Okay, so I'm going to give this a width. And in this case, I want a width of 100% as well, because I want it to be 100% wide. And there is a specific width. So again, this is where it really helps to have this block set up, because you have a basic idea of what your elements are going to be like. So we want 100% wide so that it stretches based on the browser. But I want a fixed height. So it's about 820 pixels, 819. I'll do 819 pixels high. 819 px. We want to be able to see it, so I'm going to give it a background color of, yeah, we'll do yellow. So test it again. Now I'm going to have to refresh mine because my live update's not working, but if I scroll down, you can see that I've got two main sections now. I've got orange and yellow. So I can do the same thing with footer. In this case, footer is not a class, it's an element, so all I have to do is type in the name of that element. Footer, curly brackets, I want the width. And by the way, guys, you can copy and paste. So what I can do is just copy this whole thing, paste it into here, just change the value of the height and the background color. So the height is about, and we can't use point value. So in this case, we've got 152.48. We need to either round it up or round it down. I'm going to round it down to 152. So 152 px. Oops, I already have px. And I'll just change the color to, now to get that pop up again, it's best just to delete the stuff that's after background color, put in a colon, and you'll get that pop up again. You can choose any of these random colors. So again, I'm going to refresh, I'm going to scroll down, you can see yellow, and now you can see green. So now you can see the structure of that site. So that's your basic element here. Right, so I'm going to do one more level with this video, and then we'll continue the rest on the next video. Okay, so what's the next level? So next level we have nav and section. So let's just focus on header for now. So what goes in the header? We're going to have a nav in the header, and we're going to have it says section of banner. It's got an image and it's got a H1. So yeah, section is okay for that, as long as it's got some text in it. So for a section to be valid in HTML, it needs to have some text. So whether that's a header, H1, or a paragraph, it needs to have a text in it. So we'll use a section in this case rather than a div. A section is a new element introduced to HTML5 as well. Okay, so in my header, I'm going to hit return, and I'm going to add these two elements. So I'm going to add a nav. So I'm just going to type nav and then hit the tab key, and that will create the open and close tags for our nav. Outside of the nav, we want a section, so I'm going to type in section dot banner, and I'm going to hit the tab key, and it will create a section with a class of banner. So that's our next section there. Okay, so sections have been introduced after divs because basically, if everything's made out of a div, then it makes it a little bit difficult code-wise to be able to see what's what. Sections need to contain, as I mentioned before, they need to contain text. So anything that's divided into a section will have text in it directly. If you have, say, a section with a div inside, that's not valid HTML. So sections must contain text inside of them. That's it's not a rule I made. It's a rule that's made up by take it to w3.org, which are the people that make rules about how elements should be used. Okay, so section.banner. Right, so now inside of our div.content, we then have a section. Now this won't be, yes, this will be a section because it has text in it. This will not be a section, so I'm going to change this. This should actually be a div because it doesn't contain text inside. It contains other containers inside, which then will contain text. So I'm going to call this div. So this is going to be a div with a class of articles. So inside our content, hit return. We're going to create a section with a class of copy. So it's going to have some text in it. Sorry, I might just shrink that so you guys can see. I haven't hit return. It's just, this is called word wrapping. So it's word wrapping based on how much space I have on my text. Because I have pretty big text, it word wraps on me, which in your case probably wouldn't do it. So don't hit return unless you really need it. So for me, it's doing the word wrap. So inside of section, but outside, inside of content, but outside of the copy, we're creating a div with a class of articles with an S in the end, because each article will go into the articles div. Right. So now we've got the structure that we need, and we're going to need some CSS to control these. Again, I tend to color these in. I still do this, what you're seeing here, I still do this because I like to see what's happening as I do it. I want to make sure that it's all working first before I move on to the next thing. Right, so it's always a good idea to work this way, especially if you're a beginner. Okay, so we want to control our nav and our banner. So we need to switch to our CSS. Increase this a little bit. Okay, and now I do this because it makes it easier for me to locate the code, but you don't have to do it. This just makes it easier for me. I know that the nav and the section with a class of banner are inside the header. So the next set of rules I'm going to make are going to be underneath the header, because that just makes it easier for me to find where those rules are. So I want to control the nav. Now, here I want to talk about specificity, so being specific about what you're doing. In a web page, you can actually have a nav at the top of your site, but then you can also have another nav, another navigation, say on the side, on a sidebar, and then you can have another navigation in the footer if you wanted to as well. So you can have navigations in multiple locations. So how does a browser know which nav you're talking about in your CSS when you're targeting? So if I say nav, how does it know which one of those navs, if I had 3 of them, which one I was targeting? In this case, what you can do is you can actually be specific as to where that nav is located. So this nav is actually located inside of our header. So we start with selecting the header first, space, and then we tell it to select the nav. So it's saying the nav only inside of the header. So if we had 3 navs, it would know that we're only selecting the nav that's inside the header. Create curly brackets, and now I can control that. All right, so the nav in my design, the nav goes 100% the width of our header. Right, so I want the width to be 100%. There is a specific height though, so it's about 60. I've got 65 there, but I'm pretty sure it's 60. I'm going to hide that. Pretty sure, yeah, it's 60 pixels. So I didn't measure this. Properly. So that really should be 60 pixels. Okay, so that's 60 pixels. So I'm going to make the height a fixed height of 60 pixels. And again, I need to give it a color. So I've got like this orangey color, so any random color that's other than orange I can use. Background color. So I'm going to just say blue, for instance. So if I refresh this page, I now at the top have this nav bar. Okay, so the banner. Again, now I don't need to be too specific in this case because there is only one banner. Right, so if I had multiple classes of banner, then I need to be a bit more specific. But in this case, I can just target the class instead of saying header banner. Right, so I'm going to say dot banner. Again, for some reason mine helps me. Hopefully yours will, but if it doesn't, just type in the word banner and then put in the curly brackets. I think I used to have a plugin there and I may have deleted it or something, but it's still working. So hopefully it's helping. This is helping you so that you don't have to go in and type everything in. Okay, so with banner, I want the width of the banner to be 100% as well. And there is a specific height for that banner. So I've got a height of 539. Now we do need to be a little bit accurate with this because what's happening is our navigation at the top kind of fits in like a jigsaw puzzle, like a puzzle, so that then they fit exactly within that 600 pixel high dimension. So we need to be pretty accurate in terms of getting these guys to fit. So you could use percentages if you wanted to, but then then you've got this flexibility as the screen increases in height. Sometimes you don't want that. You want people just to be able to scroll up and down. So I want the height to be 539 exactly. So height to be 539 pixels. Oops. Again, we want some color because we want to be able to see where that banner is. So I'm going to give it a background color of, I'll do aquamarine. Refresh this and you can see that I've got now that aquamarine, the blue and the aquamarine, which is my banner. Right, Right, next we have copy, and we also have article. So we've got classes that we need to select. It doesn't matter whether they're in sections or in divs. You can even create, say, a header with a class, and create, a footer with a class if you wanted to, as long as you're targeting the class itself, not the element. Yeah, so in this case, our copy class is inside of our content. So again, what I would do in my case is I would create the selector underneath the content itself. Just makes it easier for me to find that later on. You will end up, when it comes to CSS, you will end up with hundreds of lines, if not thousands of lines. So when I do certain websites, I'll find that I have thousands of lines worth of CSS in there. So being organized is pretty important. So we're going to select the copy. So I'm going to just say dot copy. Again, you could be specific, but in this case, because there's only one copy element, there's no need to be specific. Okay, so copy. And we want that to be 100% wide, but then 300. Now we've got points there, so that's not going to help us. So I'm going to say 340 high. Okay, so a width 100% and a height of 340. It's always good to have this kind of stuff because then you can refer to it. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but it's a good guide as to what your site's going to look like. It's going to look very similar to what you see on here on the screen. Okay, so and we want a background color of, and again I'm just going for some random colors, dark red maybe, and refresh, and I have to scroll down to see it. You can see my dark red section here. Okay, so now I've got one more section to do, which is the articles. So again, the same thing, dot articles, and the articles is 480 pixels tall. So again, we could copy this, guys. There's nothing wrong with copying in code, copying and pasting. So width, we want the height to be 480. So let's just change this to 480, and I can change the color. So again, if I just delete all the way to the colon, put the colon in, and I should be able to pick from any of these colors. So blue, violet will do. So if I refresh this, there's my blue violet, so you can scroll up and down, and then there you've got all the sections. So we've got boxes inside of boxes, and that will just keep going. Right, so I think the last thing we did, I did say I was going to stop at this point, but the last thing we did was we put in our anchors. Right, and because they're kind of sections that go inside the nav, that would probably be the next thing I want to do. So these here. But yeah, I will cut it and then we'll go on to the next video after this.